In this video, we will discuss Platonism and Gnosticism. In his works Republic, Phaedo, and Timaeus, Plato presents an entire philosophy on life and afterlife. It goes a little bit like this. This is you, and before you were born into the world, you were in the land of forms, also known as heaven. Now, while you were in the land of forms, you were what is known as a psyche. A psyche means a mind or a soul, and wandering around the land of forms, you were easily able to recognize the perfect versions of everything. You were ruled over by a being called God, and this God is made up of several forms, particularly the form of good, intellect, and soul. God was the perfect version of good, intellect, and soul. There were other forms as well. Some existed in God, some were created by God. However, all of these perfect versions of everything existed in the land of forms. The land of forms was, by definition, perfect. Now, between you and the earth was a barrier of darkness. You passed through this barrier in order to be born, and the process of passing through this barrier was so traumatic that in essence you forgot about the land of forms. So while you were on the earth, you had to relearn everything that you had forgotten. Eventually, if you were lucky, you'd eventually grow old, and one way or another, you would indeed die, and your psyche would pass through the barrier again into the land of forms. To Plato, this was a never-ending cycle of life and afterlife, though many of the later theologies would say that this only happens once. The later theologies were all known as either Platonic or Gnostic. In essence, they believed that the nature of God in heaven could be known. On the nature of God, the form of good means that God is by definition the perfect version of good. He is all good or omnibenevolent. He also has the perfect version of intellect and soul, though later these forms would be marginalized in favor of other forms. The form of knowledge would make up God. This would mean that God had all knowledge or omniscience. If God was made up of the form of power, that meant that God contained the perfect version of power, all power, or omnipotence. And if he was all good and all powerful and all knowing, God would have in himself, or eventually create, the forms of mercy, hope, truth, faith, wisdom, spirit, light, patience, life, humans, and love. This God would have either as his own aspect or as a created form, literally anything that could be seen as positive. This God was the ultimate being, the ultimate creator, and he had to be known. And the way he was known was largely through deduction. For example, a perfect version of light is assumed to exist. This fire is a version of light, and this star is a version of light. They are both lesser copies of the perfect light. What they share is light, but neither is perfect light. Since perfect light is assumed to exist and does not exist on Earth, it must be in the land of forms. Everyone has a version of intellect, yet no two intellects are the same, and none of them are perfect. The perfect version of intellect must exist in the land of perfection, the land of forms. Wisdom exists everywhere, yet none of it is perfect. Dreams, astrology, and divination could all provide wisdom. These versions of wisdom may help determine the nature of the land of forms, but perfect wisdom exists only in heaven. This is in essence how Platonism and its offspring Gnosticism worked. There are traits of this world that are assumed to be poor copies of the ultimate forms or ideas in heaven, and the nature of those forms can be roughly known by exploring the nature of this world.